Welcome back to another episode of Success Talks. I'm your host, Jared. I go by Self Taught Success on the internet, and the meaning of that name is all the information you're looking for is out there. It's just up to you to seek it out, find it, and then apply it on the path to your goals. And staying on brand with that, we have another great founder here with us today, Mr. Samuel Gibson, to share his success story and to hear more about his company and the great things that they're doing. And fun fact about Sam, he is, as far as I know, the youngest founder and CEO to ever take a company public. So, Sam, super excited to have you to talk about Hadron Energy today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jared. Excited to be here. Look forward to sharing some more about my background, of course, and where I see the industry going. Very excited to share some more.
Super cool. And one of the things that's also super cool and just how small the world is once you start building a brand and getting to know people is me and you have never actually met in person, but our grandparents were both farmers in the same small town of about 1,000 people. Just cool how the world always connects different people. Sam, I want to break this interview up in two different parts because with your industry, the nuclear energy industry, there's a lot of misconceptions. And I think there's a vast knowledge of where people are at with understanding the industry and learning about the industry. And so I think there's one group of people that know really nothing about nuclear energy, or maybe they're hesitant behind it because of the word nuclear. And then I think there's also a group of people who really understand the benefits of nuclear and how impactful it's going to be in our world and with AI and the energy industry moving forward. And so I want to do the first part of the interview, maybe for those people who are new to the industry, who want to just learn some basics about the industry and how the industry works and the benefits of nuclear versus some of the other ways that power comes about to be. And the second part of the interview, I want to dive deeper into your company, the specifics of your company, and where the industry as a whole is moving. And so if you're maybe more of an expert or maybe more well educated on the industry, maybe fast forward to halfway through this interview. I'll put the show notes below where you can get to, dive into specific topics that you'd like to hear Sam talk in deeper detail about. So Sam, I just want to start it off. Who are you and what is Hadron Energy?
Yeah, of course. So thanks again, Jared. Really excited to share some more. So I'm Sam Gibson, the founder and CEO of Hadron Energy. And yeah, I got my mechanical engineering degree from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And I've also got an engineering leadership degree from there. So really passionate about this whole industry. And ultimately, I did quite extensive research and a deep dive on the state of the market when I was in college. And I found there to be sort of a lack of progress from sort of the microreactor and small modular reactor space, which, to be totally fair, there's a lot of potential here. And, there's not a single microreactor or small modular reactor plugged into the grid today in the US. And I feel like that is just a major problem because we really should have many of these deployed around the country and eventually the world, of course. So what I did was I researched various types of designs at a high level. There's a few different types. There's a light water design, there's a high temperature gas design, which basically means whatever type of reactor you have, there's a special way to cool it at a very high level again. And these are how those in the industry kind of differentiate these designs. There's, as I mentioned, light water, high temperature gas, liquid sodium, liquid metal, heavy water, and plethora of other types of designs. But for purposes of this discussion, really keeping it kind of high level. At the end of the day, it's sort of a fancy way of boiling water to create steam that is then converted into electricity carbon free. And really that's what gets me the most excited about it. Growing up, I'm originally from South Dakota. As you mentioned earlier, that's a really amazing fact about our grandparents. That's really cool. I will have to chat with you more about that. So growing up in South Dakota, I was always outside, and I just really appreciated being in areas that were clean. And I hope that, we can preserve the environment as much as we can. And really, nuclear power is the best way to do that. It's a low carbon solution, and we desperately need it to decarbonize, especially with all the AI factories coming up and reshoring of manufacturing. The need for power is enormous right now. To give you an idea, it's projected that America needs approximately 200 gigawatts of new power by 2030. And just so you know what that means, a gigawatt can power, and that's just 1 gigawatt can power about a million homes. So it's a lot of power. And we need to seriously think about how are we going to meet this demand. I would much rather have it be clean energy rather than something that is not healthy for the planet, but more importantly, also people, because nuclear power actually has the effect of being clean for the environment, which then improves health for the surrounding people as well. So those are sort of just like some high level ideas. And then, of course, you have different types of designs. As I mentioned, you have different sizes. So we're building a micro modular reactor at 10 megawatts, fully manufactured in a centralized facility that can power 10,000 homes. That's sort of our scale. And then you get into small modular reactors and then the full scale. So the breakdown is microreactors produce for one module between 1 to 20 megawatts of electric power. So that's 1,000 to 20,000 homes for one unit that you could power. And then going up from that, the SMRs are between 20 to 300 megawatts electric. So 20,000 to about 300,000 homes that you could power. And then finally, the full scale is considered 300 megawatts plus, but it's typical that most full scale plants are around a gigawatt or so. And really, what it comes down to is the US has 94 reactors today, and they're all light water. They are an amazing fleet. We are leading in terms of energy production by nuclear power plants. However, other countries are drastically building up their programs. And a lot of this comes with the push for decarbonization, but also the AI push as well. So the broader market has never had as clear of signals as it does today. Public support is also the highest it's ever been for nuclear power. So it's just a great time. And even when I started the business, Hadron Energy, the support was not exactly where it is today, which is great because I got in kind of early. But, this is like something that we have to continue to build upon and really capture the momentum because we actually need to build plants and really get as many in the ground as we can.
So you bring up a lot of good points there. You mentioned the difference between full scale, SMR, and MMRs, and you also bring up the decarbonization. And so I would love to hear your difference on the difference between the different energy sources. I know a lot of people are pushing, carbon free, carbon neutral. If you look at all the big companies, I believe Amazon has a pledge to be carbon neutral by 2050, and there's numerous of companies like that. Why is nuclear the best path to carbon neutrality versus wind and solar and some of these other carbon-free sources? So maybe if you could touch on capacity factor. What does capacity factor mean? The difference behind that, and also I think one of the biggest misconceptions, which could be a totally a topic on its own, but the safety factor of nuclear, even though the word sounds maybe a little scary, is actually safer than some of those other, carbon-free sources that people don't necessarily think about, like wind and solar, even, or it competes very closely with those. So, could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great point and something I like to share for fun. In my kind of early days of researching everything, what I found fascinating was the word nuclear. You know where it comes from?
Nucleus, right?
Yeah, nucleus. And if people are afraid of the word nuclear, then truly they should be afraid of everything because nucleuses are everywhere. So I just think that's kind of funny to share. But at the end of the day, it comes down to really looking into this subject and analyzing, comparing where nuclear power sits versus like solar and wind, like you're saying. Of course, the capacity factor is a place we can start. It's a very important consideration given today nuclear power plants have a capacity factor, and keep in mind they're scheduled to have about this. It's about 94% right now. And what that means is a capacity factor is what percentage of time is this plant producing maximum power? So if it's rated for example, 10 megawatts, it's producing that 94% of the time, but that downtime is for routine inspections, maintenance, and things like this. So that's really important to consider. And that's the highest capacity factor of any energy form out there because you look at something like wind next. Wind has approximately a 34% capacity factor. And what this looks like is, of course, the wind isn't always blowing. It's not that efficient. And the thing that I'm always like wondering about is, well, all right, you have this wind farm. At the end of the useful life, you can't do like anything with these wind blades or these plants in general. So a lot of times they just kind of get buried in the ground. And I
Yeah.
mean, it's
And
just kind of wasteful.
they don't decompose either. I think one of the misconceptions, everybody's like, well, nuclear waste is bad. It's like, well, what about wind waste? What happens to all those windmills? You know, those go underground and they sit there forever and those don't decompose. Anyways, just go ahead.
No, it's a great point, and, you know, a similar thing could be said for solar. When I look at everything in terms of efficiency, I look at scale, solar, in my opinion, is the absolute worst of it all because you have to have fields upon fields of solar panels just to compete with what one of our microreactors could produce, for example. The amount of land that we use is so drastically reduced from a solar farm because their capacity factor is around 23%, which means to achieve like 100% capacity factor in general, you'd probably have to build 4 times as much capacity just to achieve. Say you have the need for 10 megawatts. Well, that probably means you need to build 40 megawatts worth of solar if that's what you need 24/7. And for like these upcoming projects with data centers, they have to have 24/7 power, and, the solar and battery combination is actually relatively expensive, and it's not very efficient. So, I think moving things on site, for example, like what the Hadron reactor is doing as an MMR, micro modular reactor, we have a lot of improvements in those efficiencies that are lost with solar, for example.
So you mentioned the land part, and that
Mhm.
applies on whether full scale SMR, MMR, as far as using a small amount of land to produce the same amount of power as you would with solar or wind. But even more so, that applies to you specifically using the MMR. And for people who aren't familiar, your unit is small enough that it can fit on the back of a flatbed pickup.
Trailer,
Right.
yeah. A
And so
trailer, yeah.
thank you. On the back of a trailer there. So, can you explain why you have decided to go with the MMR, the size that you're going versus an SMR?
Yeah, there's a lot of advantages in going with a microreactor over an SMR. So the reason being, ultimately, it also comes down to speed to license the reactor. Micromodular reactors are considered to be low consequence by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which means because of their smaller footprint, they actually have an accelerated pathway to license these things, get them to the market, and they're very safe. You know, how we're designing, especially leveraging existing fuel bundles. So when you think about this, the arrangement of the core design itself is something pretty unique in a reactor, and that's what we are optimizing right now. We have a very unique core design, and we're leveraging these fuel bundles that are widely used, so they're well understood. And it really just comes down ultimately to the energy density of nuclear power using uranium. We're using low enriched uranium plus enriched between 5 to 10%. And today, reactors typically only get up to about 5% enrichment on the full scale. And there are, I think, a couple projects that are out there that they've fueled with slightly higher than 5% at the full scale. So that I think that's great. But now where we sit is a really compelling point of compact power because of the enrichment level, because of the size and the fuel bundles that we're using. It makes it for a very compact solution, which, by the way, one plant can power 10,000 homes. And I believe the latest number that we've gotten is it only requires zero point 0.6 acres of land for our unit.
That's a pretty small amount. And for people who maybe don't realize that, if you live in a neighborhood that's like maybe 2 to 3 house plots, so that's a
Mhm.
much smaller scale than like an entire, farm where you drive for hours and it's just windmills everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. Which, if you're from the Midwest and you ever drive through Iowa, you're probably going to find some. Sam, we talked a little bit about on the windmill base on the waste with that, and they basically bury them underground. I know a big concern for most people when they're first hearing about nuclear, or if they don't know much about it, one of their biggest concerns on the reasons why they don't like it is the nuclear waste. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on what happens to the nuclear waste. How safe is that nuclear waste? Is it safe for people to live in communities who have these nuclear power plants? And also with that, I'm kind of throwing three questions at you, is a lot of people who are against nuclear, maybe they have the misconception that it's going to raise their power bill or make their own energy within their own home inefficient.
It's a great set of questions. First, I'll answer with a story I think is really unique. I visited Idaho National Lab, and this is the birthplace of the nuclear reactor. Really exciting. And firstly, tour the facility. It's absolutely amazing. And what I did was I walked across this platform over a massive pool of water. And at the very bottom of it, there were spent fuel rods, and I could just see them sitting there, and it was absolutely fascinating because I believe it was around 20 feet deep of water. And what was fascinating was they said that you only need about 7 to 10 feet to block, like, for example, any radiation, because water, is a natural shielder of radiation. And they just had like the extra 10 feet for, redundancy. Just looking down at those fuel bundles was very fascinating. So, to kind of answer your question, the way that waste is handled today is typically you have a spent fuel pool of water, and these fuel bundles sit at the bottom of this pool. And then when the time comes, generally 1 to 5 years, however long it is that it takes for the fuel to actually cool down, these can be extracted and moved into dry cask storage. So the really unique thing about this, for those that are interested, if you look up like with the Department of Energy, dry cask storage, you can actually see all of the waste today, a picture of these dry casks holding this fuel. And by the way, it honestly does not take up that much space at all. And it's very fascinating to think how much energy it has produced and how relatively low space it takes up. And everything is very contained and shielded. And these are the kinds of things that's very important for people to know is nuclear power is the safest form of energy there is, and it's also the cleanest. So we need to build as much as we can. So on a second point there, I believe the next sort of topic was, what about, nuclear raising the electric bill here as a consumer? I'm going to share a case study because in South Dakota, actually, they are looking at building a data center. And at the beginning of this, there's a lot of people that were really, really excited. In particular, my dad was very excited. And I said, well, hey, you know what that means for you, right? The bill is going to go up because they have to now, this data center is going to be drawing the energy that would be going to your house. And nuclear power, for example, a micro reactor or small modular reactor, will just power that data center specifically so that it doesn't actually increase. In fact, maybe it'll decrease the cost of power. With more, it's a basic supply and demand thing. The more supply we have of power, the more cost effective it will become.
So just to make sure I'm getting this right, so what you're saying is right now, if these big companies like Meta or Amazon or anybody comes and builds a big data center in your community, and I know in the small town that I'm from, we had a couple big ones built right around us within the last few years. And so right now, all the power that those facilities are using, they are pulling that from the existing grid, which makes, like you said, supply and demand. It affects that for the average consumers and the average Americans who live around that and makes their power bill higher. And so what you're saying is with your product and with MMRs, you can specifically deliver that unit straight to Meta or straight to that data center, where that data center can use specifically the energy from that nuclear power unit that you guys are providing. And then it doesn't pull from the existing grid, so it doesn't impact the everyday user around that area. Is that correct?
That's exactly what we're targeting. Yes, especially because like this is such a important topic given the everyday American does not want to see their electric bill increase. And if we can just go directly to the site, and this is considered a behind the meter solution. Typically, a microreactor is like the perfect solution for that. Small modular reactors, they're still kind of larger in size. You could consider them to be still utility scale, which is obviously much larger scale, but drawing from the grid anywhere makes the surrounding price increase unless you have a solution like an MMR on the site specifically serving that facility. So yeah, that's basically exactly what we're looking to prevent is actually costs going up.
That's a win for everybody. It's a win for the data centers because they get more efficient power. They get people who aren't mad at them, and the community
Mhm.
gets a better, their bill doesn't come up. And also with that, those data centers are going to provide thousands and thousands of new jobs for that local economy, which should boost that economy.
That's exactly right.
So, Sam, I want to dive a little bit more into Hadron specifically and talk about specifically what you guys are doing. I know we just kind of talked more broader based stuff with the industry as a whole. So, I'm always curious as an entrepreneur, where does the idea for Hadron Energy come from? I mean, out of all the things you could do in the world for a career, whatever it is, I know you've had success as a founder previously as well. You scaled a business from 0 to 4 million in, like, I don't know, 8 days or 8 months or something that was really short. And you did that at, I think, 21, and then sold that business before you started Hadron. And so if I'm wrong, you can correct me on that. But how that was a different business, but it's still kind of tied to, it introduced you to some of these data centers. How does one go from anything in the world to, I'm going to start a nuclear energy company and I'm going to build these micro reactors? Where does that come from, and how does it go from, here's an idea that I had, I wrote it on paper, and now I'm actually doing it?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first thing I'll do is just share just a brief kind of update on the first business that I helped start. This one grew from 0 to $4 million in revenue in 8 months. It was a plumbing and HVAC service business, and yeah, I was working on this data center specific project, which really opened my eyes to, hey, look at how much power these guys are using. Where's it going to come from? I don't think they knew, but they're planning for it. So ultimately, what it came down to was I, like yourself, Jared, I'm definitely entrepreneurial. When I see a very big opportunity, maybe a better opportunity than what I had, I think it made a lot of sense for me to make the jump because yeah, my first company, I didn't have as much autonomy as I think I really wanted, and I knew I could start something and make it much, much larger than myself, and ultimately much larger than $4 million, which is very true today, as you've seen. So I'll talk to you about that in a second. I actually had the way that Hadron started was I did a lot of research in my undergrad. I wrote a brief senior thesis on the market and what I thought of it. And ultimately, the microreactor industry really intrigued me because there wasn't any progress being made. And I thought to myself, well, why is there not progress being made? How is there not a single one plugged into the grid? How is there not a single microreactor licensed? That is just crazy because this should be already happening today. But the fact that it wasn't just made me, kind of go crazy about it. I was like, well, maybe I should do something about it. And I couldn't stop thinking about this idea. And ultimately, I think there comes a time if you're aspiring to start a business, there comes a day when you just have to go for it and like trust your instincts because if you don't, the opportunity cost of you not starting it is far higher than like the worst case scenario, in my opinion, if you start a business, is you learn a lot of things. And that's literally the worst case scenario because there's no better experience than just going out on your own and really trying something. So that's how I just took the leap of faith. I drove all the way from South Carolina to San Francisco over the course of a week, and I incorporated Hadron out of an Airbnb, which is really funny.
Yeah.
And I was just very excited about it. And ultimately, I just started building things and hustling as hard as I could to really make this a reality. And the way that, like, the early days are the most painful, to be honest. The early days were hard, but of course, that's what makes it a resilient company. If you truly believe in something, I think you just have to continue kind of fighting for it. And if it's if it's right, the markets will respond and you'll see the traction and you just keep going. So that's sort of, and I want to make sure, I want to make sure I hit your questions because what was the other part of it? I think there was a little bit more there.
No, I think that kind of hit it just as far as you did previously, and how does the idea form from a thought to paper to actually doing it. So I think that that kind of hits that. One thing as you were speaking, I thought of, obviously Steve Jobs is pretty big, but that's what instantly comes to mind as far as like he started Apple in the garage or whatever, and it's like now if you drive by, it's like a museum. It's like that Airbnb guy. Like, what if that ends up his Airbnb ends up being like a national museum or something. Probably doesn't even know it, but that's pretty cool. So I'm always curious too, as far as equity and ownership. Obviously a company like this is so vast, and if you guys go check out the Hadron Energy LinkedIn page, I believe there's like 48 job openings right now. You have a team that's grown very fast and expanded already. So there's a lot of hires and a lot of smart people that you need to help you out to make this happen. But I'm always curious, when you're early on, you're starting a company, it's just you to start with. And then you've raised money a couple of times successfully, which means you're giving equity to investors. And then when you hire top tier talent, there's probably equity involved there. How do you decide as a founder, regardless of industry, but just as an entrepreneur, this is what I want to do. This is how I have to get there. I have to give up equity versus like maintaining your own equity and then figuring out raising money and salaries and payroll and all that culmination of things. What is your thoughts on that, as far as how do I decide how much equity I'm giving up versus maintaining it for myself versus giving to my employees versus investors versus leaving open?
That's a great question. And I think really what it comes down to is it's a kind of case by case basis for, a hardware company versus a software company. It's much, much different, far more capital intensive. Yeah, it takes the lead times are just so much longer, and especially a nuclear energy company, because to your earlier point, Jared, like in just starting this business, the typical startup founder is more probably on the software side, like doing something fast and really growing very quickly. Of course, we grew fast, but like it's a different type of growth. So like these types of companies like Hadron, for example, where I was a solo founder and raised some initial money. And ultimately, really what it comes down to in determining like equity grants is you do your best to kind of value what like the grant is worth and what you expect from, this individual coming on. The same goes from like a salary and just a total compensation package of I can tell you that people coming into our team get paid very, very well. And that's something I'm very proud of as well, because I want to treat everybody here incredibly well so they can just do the best work that they can. Now, in terms of equity ownership, I'm personally the majority holder and it comes from the founder shares. So I think it is important that like the early founder, it depends, on performance. I think benchmarking things off of performance should be the way that grants are issued and things like this. But in terms of like control, it really is kind of founder specific because maybe a founder, for example, is not necessarily the best like CEO or like can take a company public or so there always has to be that thought of, well, okay, if I have X ownership, well, what does the company need? Rather than thinking of yourself, you have to think outside of the box and say, all right, what does the company need to be successful? Who are the people I have to put in place? What are they going to require? And ultimately, you start a business so that it grows to be much larger than yourself. So, yeah, it's really interesting. It's a good question, but I would say to summarize, like determining the benefits of bringing on very highly qualified people, you just have to see, all right, what would they be like more than happy with? And because as a leader, you have to give more than you receive a lot of the times. And I think that's just fine. But that's how you build a really amazing team.
I think that's a great answer. And I always think as the founder and CEO, you should be the majority stakeholder, even after you dilute and sell equity or whatever it may be. I do think like none of this would exist if I didn't have this idea. So I do think there's a lot of value in that. But it also makes me think of NVIDIA with Jensen. He talks about, yes, like I'm super, super wealthy, billionaire, but I've also made more millionaires than anybody else. So, there's a lot of value in that. And also, NVIDIA just had a deal with the Department of Energy, I think maybe last week, that may also benefit the nuclear industry. And Elon, his pay package is very much like you said, as far as like it's very incentive based. Like I don't get any of that if we don't win. So like it's a win win scenario. So I think that makes sense. I want to ask you a few more questions specifically about Hadron on this podcast. I like to talk about how entrepreneurs found their success. You said we'll talk about it a little later. I think that moment's now. As far as I know, you're the youngest founder and CEO to ever go public. And I believe the next one would be the Snapchat founder at 26 years old. So you guys aren't public yet, but Q1 of 2026, you guys are scheduled to go public. And I know the language is really tight there, so I'll let you specify that. But $1.2 billion is the valuation that you guys have announced. So how does that process come about to be versus I have this company, things are going well, we're growing, we've raised money a few times, our valuation keeps growing, and I want to go public. One, what's your reasoning for wanting to go public? Obviously, it's very cool, but there's business decisions behind that. Why did you make that decision? And then how does that process go about to be where you find a company to help you go public with your merger? What does that process look like as far as actually getting listed?
Yeah, of course. Before I get into those 2 points, I definitely want to address the youngest founder and CEO thing because it's definitely exciting, of course. Interestingly enough, I didn't really set out to do it. It just kind of happened naturally. And then I started looking into it. And I was like, oh, wow, I think I'm, at 24, I should be the youngest. I couldn't find anybody that was younger. And it's, I think it's really exciting. But more importantly, I think it's important because this industry truly needs, to build up the younger generation of the workforce and having somebody that is recruiting, amazing engineers from all walks of life. But obviously, we've got some, um, internships out there that are absolutely amazing. And that's kind of the way that I feel like I've got most of my experience early on is through these types of internships. Being from South Dakota, I started working at 14, as I'm sure, Jared, you probably have a similar story. But yeah, I think it just comes with a lot of hard work and like building it up from there. The reason for going public ultimately comes down to the momentum that we have, most importantly, but also the capital raise that comes with it. As you mentioned, we are targeting right now in the first half of Q1 2026 to be publicly listed. So yeah, it's perfect timing. This administration is pushing very, very hard for this industry to commercialize as many nuclear power plants as we can. So from a timing perspective, I think this was the absolute perfect time to do this. So I didn't tell you this before, but when we incorporated, specifically July 8th, 2024, one day later, July 9th, 2024, the Advance Act was signed into law, which basically stated the US is going to triple nuclear capacity by 2050. And then multiple countries followed along. I think it's like 30 plus at this stage, but
Yep.
the timing of all of this was absolutely perfect. And going public really helps us capture the momentum that we're seeing internally, but also externally, because we need to be building very rapidly. And I think this is really going to unlock that for us. So the reason for going public is for obviously raising the capital, getting our name out there, and really just continuing to push very hard because we need to move quickly. And then as far as like how the process works and what it entails, really what it came down to is, I live in New York City now, so I have the privilege of working with excellent investment bankers, and we started looking for various, SPAC groups to work with, and ultimately came across the group we're working with now, Gig Capital, and they're an excellent group. They have a lot of experience doing this, and really it came down to finding the right fit for us, just like finding a new employee, somebody that you really can work very well with. It's a similar process because, yeah, they'll have a stake in us as well. So this is a partnership, truly. People that you can partner with like that is the most important. The one thing is, as a founder, you may think you can do everything by yourself, but that's actually very much not the case. You need a very strong team, and that's basically how it's gone.
Sam, you talk about your reasons for going public and the deal itself a little bit, but obviously what you're building is a very expensive product, so it requires a lot of money to do it before you can actually sell it. So I believe this deal gives you guys access to a very large amount of cash to help you build your product. Are you able to talk about the specifics of that a little bit? But then also, I know you guys already have a pretty impressive, and maybe this also might be a record as far as letter of intent signed. Are you able to talk about those letter of intents that are ready to go, people who have already committed to buying your units?
It's a great point. First, surrounding the transaction itself, luckily for us, one of the biggest milestones we just achieved was filing our S4, the Form S4, which basically is a very long document. I believe it's around 700 pages.
That's big.
But if you're very, yeah, if you're very curious and detail oriented, you can definitely find there's a section in there that talks about the financial section, and it's around $200 million dollars in the trust account that Gig Capital 7 has. Along with this, we're going to raise another round to go along with this trust. So yeah, we're looking at approximately, the best case scenario, we're targeting to have $300 million dollars by the time, we list there. So that's ultimately the goal. It will enable us to commercialize the reactor, get it licensed, and ultimately have the first revenue generating microreactors out there. That is our target.
What's your timeline on having your reactors be finished, sold, and when you can start collecting revenue on it?
Yes. So we have a timeline right now, mostly due to licensing timelines as we speak. It's looking like 2029 for the first revenue generating event for us. But with everything going on, there's so many changes happening. It could potentially be sooner. So we'll see about this. But this actually brings me to the next point, and that's regarding the letter of intents that we have. These right now are non-binding. However, we're working on specific requests that we're getting from customers to actually move towards binding agreements. And to be totally fair, starting our operation, we're not going to be able to provide a massive amount of reactors like right away, just due to we want to make sure have very strict quality control and test the unit. And then ultimately, the first one we build will be installed at a site. So it's going to be very exciting when we start putting hardware out there. But this financing event really unlocks the entire basically roadmap for us to hit these milestones we need to get us to the market very efficiently. And that's what I'm most excited about is getting a reactor out there. And we've got so much demand. It's just a matter of building the units and essentially scaling from there. So yeah, very exciting process.
Yeah, it is exciting and it's moved along very fast. And I know you've had some of those letter of intents for quite a while. And I continue to see more and more of those that you guys have announced. You mentioned the demand side of you guys having a lot of demand. You mentioned the administration a little bit and them being very friendly. I'd love to get your thoughts on earlier this year, the president signed 4 different executive orders specifically benefiting the nuclear energy industry. And so I'll let you start on that, and then I'll get into the demand side a little bit as well. And also, maybe you throw this in there as we're talking about the president. He sent addressed to you and your company on the official White House letterhead, signed a letter basically thanking you for doing what you're doing and telling you how awesome you are. If you could one talk about the executive orders, but then two maybe talk about getting that signed letter from the sitting president of the United States of America.
Yeah, no, it was very exciting, of course. So we'll get to that one second. The first point on the executive orders, really to summarize, is basically to streamline the regulations and enable these reactors to get to market really fast. However, without compromising the health and safety of the public, because obviously that's the most important thing.
Yep.
And the reason I'm mentioning this is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was already sort of working on this of streamlining a lot of these efforts. The executive orders really made it crystal clear of what is expected. And we're at the forefront of this licensing trajectory, given the licensing framework that is going to be accelerated is being built while we're also building the reactor itself and gaining feedback from the NRC through drop-in meetings, through public meetings, private meetings. It's a really fascinating process. So it's been going very well, and I obviously am very thankful for those executive orders. I think it's a very necessary thing. So, on to the second point, you're definitely right there. We received a letter in the mail from Trump and the administration, and they basically wrote that they very much support what we were doing. He was also very excited to see the entrepreneurial spirit in America. That was awesome because the day we announced the SPAC transaction, which was, I believe, September 29th, that piece of mail came in the same exact day, which was just absolutely crazy. I don't know what I was more excited about,
Yeah.
to be totally honest, because both of them were really pretty amazing.
That's gotta be like the best day of your life.
I would say so, yes. It
Yeah.
it
That's
definitely
pretty
was.
cool.
It's gonna be hard to beat that one, but when I get one reactor operating, that's also gonna be up there, I think. So we'll see. But yeah, very excited. The government is pushing very hard. They're working hard for the American people, and this is something really important for our national security, our energy security. So Hadron is doing everything we can to meet those needs.
The administration is definitely very pro nuclear energy. And you mentioned the demand side. My personal thought is, from what I know about the industry, the president and the administration is your industry's best salesman. And the reason I say that is because you see these tariff deals or these just overall business deals between other countries. Japan, there's one with the European Union, Turkey, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia. There's just five right there, but there's others as well where in these deals that they're incorporating with these other countries, many of those and those ones I just named all have nuclear power incorporated in them, whether that's tech, the SMRs and the MMRs, or the research and development, or just even talent. But basically, the administration is taking private energy companies and selling their products and services out to all these other countries. So we've seen that. We've also seen public private deals. AMD just had announced that they were going to build, I believe, 7 supercomputers in a deal with the Department of Energy, which nuclear is going to be a big part about powering that. There's a deal with NVIDIA that also just got announced within like the last week. So I'd love to get your thoughts as somebody who's building in that industry where the president and his administration is going at bat and basically selling your products in your industry everywhere. And then how does Hadron get in line to benefit from that? Obviously, you're already on the president's radar when President Trump literally sends you a signed letter and says, "Hey, good job, I like you." How does that benefit the industry as a whole? And how does Hadron position itself to make sure you guys specifically benefit from those deals as well?
That's a great question. So it's honestly amazing to see such broad support from this administration. And, we're doing everything we can to obviously fulfill what they're demanding. And keep in mind, they're very ambitious. And it's great because it's they're setting very high goals for the industry, and we're hoping to deliver as much as we can. So really what it comes down to is like the Department of Energy can only do so much, and really comes down to the industry itself to make a lot of this progress. So the DOE can help with like workforce, they can help with, national laboratories, they can help with supply chain, these kinds of things, but it really is down to the private sector to take this and run with it and really make the most of this traction. So the way that we're doing this is we're actually trying to not necessarily rely on any sort of government agency specifically. We want to be as independent as we can. Of course, we keep an eye out for like grant opportunities, but it's not necessarily like our main priority given we'll have our own funding coming in. So there's plenty of projects out there that only ask for money. And to be honest, we think there's other ways that like the Department of Energy or, things like that could actually support this industry rather than just money. Because a lot of times money's not necessarily the problem. It's more, all right, well, what's like the physics behind this reactor? Are you using off the shelf components or do you have to make everything from scratch? The DOE, for example, can't design a reactor for you. It's all up to the company. So, all this to say, we are in a great position given we're aligned with what the DOE wants, but more importantly, what the customers that we're looking to serve want as well. It's something that Hadron is positioned to benefit from these types of programs and support that I was mentioning the DOE can do by aligning with what is existing today, the supply chain, the workforce, and something a lot of people don't think about when building an advanced nuclear reactor is, well, who's going to operate the reactor? Because today, people really only know how to operate light water reactors, which is what Hadron is. So things that are more advanced than this make it more challenging to actually commercialize.
So, Sam, what's next for Hadron then? You're the first light water micro reactor company to ever go public. You're, as far as I know, the youngest founder and CEO to ever go public. You guys are going public here in Q1 of 2026. We talked about that a little bit. But what's next for Hadron? After that happens, what can people expect from your company?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we are just at the beginning, honestly, of what I feel is the biggest push that we will make with this company because going public is just the beginning of a whole new chapter. We've surpassed, the startup phase, and now we're getting into the more mature company phase where we have a lot of these processes in place. We've got outstanding people working with us. What's next for Hadron is to really deliver on all of these big milestones we have set for ourselves. And ultimately, the summary of that would be, well, let's have our first deployment no later than 2029, producing electricity, generating revenue. And along the way, we have to get licenses, we have to make critical hires, we have to grow the team. And yeah, it really comes down to making these engineering breakthroughs that I think are absolutely fascinating. And we're doing an excellent job so far. So at the end of the day, the going public transaction is for us to establish ourselves, get the brand more recognizable, and get the capital necessary to deliver on our mission. So that's what I'm really going to focus on is execution.
That sounds like a guy who's still in build mode, still
Mhm.
in build mode, always in build mode. So that's awesome. So, Sam, before we wrap this up, I want to give you the floor if you have any last thoughts you want to share, and where can people find you and stay up to date with what you guys are building.
Yeah, of course. So on the first point, sort of my final thought is I think this is really exciting time in the nuclear industry. What I would suggest for people that are interested is to really immerse yourselves and see what's going on. There is a lot of news out there about the industry, and I think educating yourself on different types of designs and what companies are doing what in the industry, I think that's a great thing to do for those that are curious. And then Hadron, of course, produces a lot of great content, whether it's on LinkedIn or X or even just our website in general. We have a amazing newsletter, and all of these get posted onto our website. So I believe we have around 25,000 subscribers to the newsletter. Yeah, it's a very exciting time for us. We are excited to connect with those that are also interested in the mission, and feel free to always connect with our team. And we're excited to share these details with you. So thanks so much, Jared, for having me on.
Yeah, for sure. And for those of you in the audience, all the links that you need for Sam and Hadron Energy, I'll put those in the comments below. And once Sam goes public here in a couple months, maybe we'll have him back on and have him give the updates from there. So with that said, thanks everybody for listening, and thanks Sam for joining me.
Thanks so much, Jared.